What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the You Know Ball podcast. I am your host, Trill Bro Dude, and today I am very excited to have onto the podcast for the first time from the Athletics Saturday Slam and Jam and Down to Dunk. We have Alex Speers. What's going on, Alex?
Thank you, Trill. It's a pleasure to be here to join a Bill Simmons historian like yourself. It's a thrill.
That's right. I think I've become more famous. Did you know that the Bill Simmons episode that we did recently is now the most popular episode of the podcast?
And why wouldn't it be? I would have never believed when I started following Bill Simmons like 2 decades ago that one day I would be listening to a podcast about a Bill Simmons podcast that was longer than the podcast it was referencing. And I enjoyed the whole thing.
Oh, thank you. Well, we have to put on for RIP to the Bill Simmons podcast, which was a short-lived podcast that we had referenced before on an older episode, but they were taken down. They literally used to review every episode of Bill's podcast.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We think I got to DM the guy because he follows him on Twitter now, but we think that Bill threatened to sue him.
Really?
Because he had the name of his podcast was Bill Simmons podcast. Like it was literally the Bill Simmons podcast in the name. So I think they were like, you can't do this. So they stopped doing it. But I'm glad that I think most of it got taken down, but I'm glad to, preserve the memory of the Bill Simmons podcast.
I hope you haven't gotten yourself on some kind of kill list from doing that podcast. That's kind of scary.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I know at least 1 or 2 people at the Ringer know me, and probably not saying the greatest things about me. But I have gotten to the point where I listen to their podcast and Bill's podcast specifically so much that I think I have a little bit of Stockholm syndrome. Like I genuinely look forward to Bill and Reslopables probably more than anything that I listen to.
Oh, I'm like way too deep now. I mean, I've been like following him since I was probably like 15.
Of course.
I can't stop at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm too invested.
Too invested in the character arc of Bill. And he's gone through many phases, many layers, but it's funny enough that we talk about Bill at the top of this podcast because there have been a few things happening with the Sixers, but I've already talked about the Harden extension to death. I don't particularly care too much about their new stadium that will be built in 10 years. I'm going with the Zach Lowe theory where I don't care about anything in 10 years because we might all be dead. So I'm going to talk today about something that I've been wanting to talk about for a while. Once again, related to the Ringer a little bit. We're going to do a Reslopables recapping the 2019 offseason, which is personally, I don't know about you, Alex, but this might be my favorite offseason of all time.
I was actually thinking about it because when you asked me to be on, I assumed it was about the OKC stuff, but I'd kind of forgotten everything else that had happened that summer. And when I started going through it, I was like, okay, if you had like a summer of slop, holy trinity, what would the years be? And I think it would be 2010, like recent 2010 with the decision and everything there. 2016 with the cap spike. And I think 2019 honestly might beat them all, with how much stuff went on that summer.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you just said. I think the decision being like such a landmark moment might be like legitimately like the birth of slop. Like you had a 30-minute to hour special about literally just one transaction about where LeBron James is going to the point now where I'm streaming 4 hours about Rudy Gobert getting traded. And LeBron really birthed, and actually if I remember correctly, I think Bill Simmons was part of the reason why he ended up doing that. I believe that he had pitched that idea to LeBron's camp. Yeah, and then he got mad when he didn't get credit for it, apparently. But kind of going back, 2016 cap spike, obviously. I think the 2016 cap spike, obviously you have the KD thing, which is in itself like changed the league. But I think the thing about the 2016 offseason that's so funny is that just there were so many bad contracts that were given out
instantly. Like we instantly knew were terrible.
like at the time we were like, are you sure about this? You sure about literally every Portland Trailblazers contract that was signed that offseason?
I remember walking, like it was in the dead of summer heat. It was so hot out here. And I saw the Evan Turner contract and I immediately called my Blazers friend and was just cackling. on the phone because I knew it was horrible. I didn't even have to think like twice about it. It was just instant reaction.
Oh, absolutely horrible. And I think that was one of those, I believe, if I remember correctly, from all those Portland contracts that were signed that offseason, I think within 2 or 3 years, they were all salary dumped in some way. Yeah. I know that eventually Turner ended up on the Hawks and then he retired. I know that I think Myers Leonard that offseason too. There were so many bad contracts. Alan Crabb.
Yeah.
Yes. Alan Crabb.
He got an offer. He got an offer from the Nets. They had to match it. Can't lose that asset for nothing.
It's like Jalen Brunson, but Alan Crabb. Like, you can't let him walk, you know? How could you ever potentially lose Alan Crabb for nothing? And then the funniest part about that is he eventually, they brought it up on a podcast I listened to recently because they said that because DeAndre Ayton got that offer sheet from the Pacers, that they can't trade for him for a year now. Like they have to wait a year, and they call it the Alan Crabb rule because they gave him the offer sheet and then they immediately traded for him like the second that they could trade for him. So not only were they like, hey, we know this is not a great contract, and honestly, I think part of the Nets' plan that summer was basically just to fuck over a bunch of teams and just throw money because they had all this money and they were like, we're just going to throw offer sheets because then teams will have to match the offer sheets and they'll have to spend a ton of money. And it was like some like galaxy brain strategy, but then they ended up bringing in Alan Crabb not that long after. So maybe they really just like Alan Crabb.
It was totally undermined by the fact that they immediately went after Alan Crabb again.
They're like, oh shit! Wow, we thought we forgot this was a bit. We didn't really mean to trade for him after this, but yeah. And then 2019 is my personal favorite offseason just because the pure amount of star movement. Because it's really the last offseason where stars moved. Like, obviously there are trades every offseason where there are multiple guys, but like a lot of these guys were just free agent signings, and that just doesn't happen anymore. Like some of them were signed in trades like Jimmy Butler, which makes me want to throw up, and we'll go into that in detail. We have KD and Kyrie moving. We have Paul George. Paul George was traded, but Kawhi was part of that, and he signed there. So like now it just kind of gets to the point, and people talk about this on podcasts all the time. They talk about it in the media where like guys just know they can get traded wherever they want. So they're like, well, I'll just get the money and then ask out later. Why am I going to take a little bit less when I can just get a 5-year bag and then eventually just pick where I want to go anyway?
Yeah, that's definitely how it felt this summer with like Zach LaVine, Bradley Beal, even James Harden. Like I remember asking Jake Fisher, like, what's the most likely that these guys move? And he like couldn't even really come up with a name. Mm-hmm. He was like, none of these guys are probably going to move. So
yeah, I know. I got really nervous because you were like, if there's anyone, and I was like, please don't speak about James Harden like that. I've already invested too much in this emotionally and asset wise. We gave up everything that we had to get James Harden, so it needs to work out. But luckily, you know, he's back on the team now. But like the thing about this offseason, we'll start up top with the Anthony Davis stuff. Because Anthony Davis was the most foregone conclusion trade that I can remember of this offseason. Like we all going into this offseason, like we didn't know what Jimmy was going to do. We never knew what Kawhi was going to do because no one does. KD and Kyrie were somewhat of a mystery until about a week before. But the AD stuff was phoned in from like February, I feel like. Do you even remember if there were any other teams that were genuinely interested? Because I read up on this a little bit and only could find one other team. Was it the Knicks? It was the Celtics because so what happened? The Knicks did their due diligence because that's what the Knicks are going to call when there's a star available because they're the Knicks. But there were these rumors for a while about Danny Ainge having this vision of getting Kyrie Irving and Anthony Davis together in Boston. And apparently, which in retrospect, they are probably very glad that nothing happened here because we now see Kyrie blowing up another team in Brooklyn right now. And this was when he was on his way out of, keep in mind, Anthony Davis only had 1 year left on his contract at the time. So if he went to Boston and things didn't work out, he could have walked. You never know with Kyrie. And when Kyrie basically chose to leave, they decided not to pursue Anthony Davis. And from what I read was they would have been willing to trade Jason Tatum for Anthony Davis, but not much else. Yeah.
That's really interesting because, I mean, what ended up happening, it's kind of seen as like the first of this new era of superstar trades, which are super picks heavy, although they did get like really good players. Although that was one of the interesting parts about this trade for me, going back and reading about the perception of Brandon Ingram and Lonzo Ball at that time. Because remember, Brandon Ingram was coming off the diagnosis of having the blood clot, and he hadn't played since then. And so a lot of people, like, we're not doctors online. Like, we don't know. That sounds really serious. And so people were wondering how that was going to affect him long term. And then Lonzo, I was looking at his first 2 seasons. So he hadn't shot above 33% from 3 yet.
Yep.
He also hadn't shot above 50% from the free throw line.
That was crazy.
And so, like, people had like wildly different views on those 2 guys as prospects. Looking back now, it like looks like an incredible trade. But I do wonder how those perceptions, how different they were at the time. Like, did it seem like the New Orleans Pelicans were getting like a future all-star in Brandon Ingram?
No, I think the perception was you did it for the picks. Like that, based on every reaction article, because I have some trade grades here from the time, and basically all of them were emphasizing the picks because it was, like you said, like it was kind of this new version of, at the time we were like, wow, they gave up so many picks to get Anthony Davis, which is crazy. A guy in a year from now that could be a free agent and go there anyway, like whatever. But it set this new standard for like just sending out a ton of picks, which we'll talk about a little bit later with OKC when they just kind of blew that out of the water in terms of picks. But like with the Ingram, Lonzo, and Hart was the other one that was included in that trade.
Right.
The Lonzo stuff was interesting because I felt like the only people that really like Lonzo at the time were calculator boys.
Can I tell you something that I found?
Yes.
So this is from 2019, 538. Their projected 7-year WAR, so their wins above replacement from 2019. So the next 7 years, these were going to be the top 10 players in the league. Harden was number 1, Giannis 2, Doncic 3, Ben Simmons 4, Nikola Jokic 5, Cat 6, AD 7, Joel Embiid 8, Lonzo Ball number 9, Jason Tatum 10.
Wow. Even with shooting 50, less than 50% from the line, couldn't shoot.
Yeah, exactly.
But analytics like love Lonzo for his whole career. Like this was the divide on Lonzo early in his career was kind of like it was kind of like the Hooper versus calculator stuff where like you would watch Lonzo and you're like, well, he's like not a great ball handler. He can't really shoot. He's a good defender and he can pass, but like how valuable are those skills when you're probably just going to be a role player? New Orleans probably looked at it like, well, we have Fred Vincent. We have a guy who can teach a lot of guys how to shoot. He has in the past. He will continue to. And he did that for both Ingram and Lonzo, it seems like. Because instantly when they got there, both of them became like, we talk about Lonzo becoming a good shooter, but Brandon Ingram became an even better shooter when he got to, because he was incredibly inconsistent his first few years in the league. The other thing about Ingram is that, and all of these guys were young, but Ingram was like, it still blows my mind that Brandon Ingram is still 24 years old, I think.
Yeah, he's still on like under 25 list.
Yeah, you're like, wait, what is this, a misprint? This guy's got to be 30 at this point. Like, how the hell is this possible? But yeah, like, that's amazing that Nate Silver had Lonzo as like one of the 10 most impactful players. Like, look at that. They always had Dante DiVincenzo as a future all-star on their projections.
Oh,
too.
really?
You sure about that? If you only watch the national championship game that he played in, you would think that.
You mentioned the picks in this deal, and I think it's important to set up like how important the draft lottery was this year, because the Lakers jumped from 11 up to 4. And I did find a report from Windy that said that like the Knicks and the Lakers were like the ones most interested at whatever time this was. And I wonder how important that ended up being, because of course the Knicks had the number 3 pick that year, which they ended up taking RJ Barrett, but the Lakers jumping up to 4, all of a sudden, like if you don't love Brandon Ingram and Lonzo Ball, like here is a blue chip pick,
Sure,
right in this immediate draft, which ended up being like the Pelicans jumped from 8 to 1. That was the Zion draft.
right.
They could have potentially had Garland at 4.
Oof.
Like, can you imagine? They traded the pick for 8, 17, and 35,
Right.
and a future second.
And they got Jackson Hayes, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and do we know the second round pick?
So the future second round pick was Herb Jones.
Oh, okay. So you get another prospect out of it. You get someone who's like legit, like going to be a very good role player for a while. So it worked. It's funny enough, the best pick out of all of them was the guy they got at 35.
I know. Like years later.
Yeah. So New Orleans jumps from 8 to 1 in the draft, which was crazy at the time. And everyone was like, David Griffin does it again. He goes to another team. In his first year, he gets the number 1 pick. Because I think the first year he was the Cavs GM, he got the number 1 pick in that draft as well. Wiggins, and he flipped it for Kevin Love when LeBron came back. That's crazy. So the Lakers jump up to 4, which basically makes it so that they're like, who cares about the Knicks package anymore? Because now we get all these prospects, plus we'll get a really good pick high up. And generally speaking, trading back to get 4 and 17, or trading back from 4 to get 8 and 17 is not terrible value, because a lot of the times, unless it's like a 5-player draft, 6-player draft, at the time, people really thought that was a 3-player draft. Like it was like Zion, Ja, and RJ were like the clear top 3 guys, and everyone else was kind of a wild card.
I got to give credit to Ryan Russillo. I told you before we started recording that I listened to roughly 5 hours of Bill Simmons' podcast from 2019. And when this trade happened, no, I'm not at all. It was 2 times speed. I was going insane. But when this trade happened, Bill was talking about, he was recommending that they trade down because of what you just said. Like, it was seen as a 3-player draft. Russillo jumped in, said, no, you just take Garland. Don't think about it. Wow. Which I don't remember a lot of people saying that at that time.
No, I mean, 2019 draft, I knew some people from draft Twitter that were high on Garland, because he kind of had that James Wiseman factor where like I think people were higher on him from draft Twitter than James Wiseman, but he kind of had that question mark. He only played 5 games in college? He didn't play much.
Yeah.
Might have been more than that, maybe 12. Like, he didn't play many games. He got an injury, and you were basically just going on his high school tape. And through a year or two, you might have looked at that pick and been like, 5th pick in the draft, like Darius Garland. And then he has his breakthrough year. Now he's an all-star, and it looks like a brilliant pick in retrospect. And it also happens to line up for the Cavs with them getting Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. So it's like, damn, all of a sudden they have a great young core there. But like 2 years ago, wasn't looking so good for the Cavs. And that's how much a guy developing like Garland. And I do wonder with New Orleans there. So DeAndre Hunter was the pick at 4, right?
Yeah. So he ended up, they traded with the Hawks.
Right. So the Hawks took DeAndre Hunter. Yeah. I always thought like, I guess I always thought this way. I was like, it's fine to trade back, but this was before Garland really broke out. Because I knew some people that were very high on Garland and said the same thing as Russillo. Got to give him credit for obviously picking that one out. But like, I remember even not that long ago, people being like Tyler Hero or RJ Barrett, or like Tyler Hero or Darius Garland. And now it's like pretty obvious to me that Darius Garland would be way ahead of Tyler Hero in the conversation. So that was such a weird draft. Like, if you look back at that year, like, it's like the top 2 picks hit, even though Zion's had a weird start to his career, but all things considered, very major hits. And then there's just like a bunch of random picks that were just kind of like, I don't know. That guy just never really got off the ground.
So can I read you a joke from Ryan Russillo? I think this is a joke. I'd like to read. This is from Ryan Russillo on one of the Simmons podcasts, referring to the picks that the Pelicans got in this deal. Okay. He said, this is like a divorced dad on spring break with kids 10 years younger than him. That's how little protection there is. Now, Trill, that's a reference to unprotected sex, correct? Right?
Well, if there's anyone that can talk about divorce and unprotected sex, it's certainly Ryan Russillo. He's got a lot of experience.
I didn't. I guess I don't know a ton about divorced dads. I guess I would say I didn't know they were known for practicing unsafe sex, so I didn't immediately get the joke when he said it.
Apparently.
You know,
Yeah.
it took me a few minutes to pick up on it, but I thought I'd share that with you.
It's an incredibly old man joke. It sounds like something Russillo would say, though. I'm not really surprised by that. He just lets him fly sometimes, although he's more aware of that stuff now. But he's so ridiculous. But yeah, wow, I'm actually surprised that that Russillo nailed that Garland thing. Good for him. He actually really liked Tyler Hero in that draft too. All things considered, for where he went for his draft spot, 100% a hit too. But back to the Anthony Davis trade, because do you remember one of the points on this? And I always made fun of it because I was like, really, you're gonna get hung up on Kyle Kuzma? Like, Kuzma was the guy that they were like, we have to keep Kuzma, and I was like, of all those guys at the time, I remember being like, Kuzma's the oldest, or at least he was like close to Josh Hart in age. And I felt like out of all of them, he had like the least amount of upside to me, where I was like, and like in retrospect, like they're all pretty good players. Kuzma, Hart, Lonzo, and then Brandon Ingram becoming an all-star level player is obviously a massive surprise. But I think that New Orleans used that to their advantage in negotiations. Like, I had a friend say this to me earlier about how, like, when there is a trade like this, if there's a guy that the other team, like for the Knicks right now, they might really want to keep Quentin Grimes, right? They're like, we're not trading Quentin Grimes for Mitchell. Like, we need to keep him. We need role players for when we get Mitchell, blah, blah, blah. The Jazz might be able to get like 2 extra first-round picks out of that trade because of the fact that they want to
like
keep
a trade-off.
Yeah. And like people said that about Matisse Thybulle during the Harden trade. If that's true, it makes me want to throw up. But but at the time, I remember them being like, I've had to like Jedi mind trick myself into being like, well, maybe Morey was just trying to boost his value around the league and be like, look, we think he's worth 2 first-round picks, so that this summer they could be like, we didn't trade him for 2 first-round picks. Do you want him? Which is funny looking back at the Kuzma thing, because like you hold on to Kuzma in this trade, he helps you win a championship the next year, and he's like an important part of your team. He even gets better after that. And then you're like, okay, we'll trade him for this version of Russell Westbrook.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, like, big picture, because we mentioned how like this was kind of like the first of this new era of superstar trades where they're like super pick heavy. Do you include the original KG and Pierce trade in that? Because that trade, even though it was super picks heavy, it doesn't feel the same as like this new era. Because I was looking back, I couldn't believe that KG was 37 at the time of that trade and Pierce was 36. In my head, I was thinking, oh, Pierce must have been like 33 or something.
Sure.
And maybe KG was 35.
I don't think I would include it, just because I think that was more Danny Ainge taking advantage of a desperate franchise that was just like, we'll do anything to get names in here to sell tickets and make the Nets relevant in Brooklyn, because they had just moved to Brooklyn. They wanted to be relevant. And I don't really include that because, like, if you look at this Anthony Davis trade, like, the Lakers had LeBron. Like, they were making an all-in move to win a championship, and they did. So ultimately, that feels more like the beginning of this kind of, because, like, I remember Sixers fans were really mad we traded 2 firsts for Tobias Harris, and I totally understood that he was expiring or whatever, but that was before it took, honestly, the Tobias Harris trade might have fucking broke the market, been like, well, Tobias Harris is worth 2 firsts, and Anthony Davis has got to be worth like 4. But like, I would definitely consider this like the first real one, where like now we're in this era of just get as many young guys and picks as possible, because when you make a trade like this, the other team's best option is just tearing it all down and going for a rebuild.
Yeah, for sure. So I went back and I was looking at all like the superstar deals from from 2011 on, like basically the last decade. And it's really interesting because this was back at the time when getting more players back was more of the preference for teams. But I just want to read some of them to you. Talk about what the peak of that team with that player was before, and then how long it took them to get back. So, for instance, 2011, Darren Williams is traded to the New Jersey Nets at the time. With Utah, Darren Williams took them to a Western Conference final. They haven't been to a Western Conference final since. The next year with Carmelo going to the New York Knicks, Melo took Denver to a Western Conference Finals. It took them 9 years to get back to a Western Conference Finals. CP3 leaving the Hornets, going to the Clippers. They got to the second round with CP3. It took them 7 years to get back to the second round. This idea that because I know some people are kind of against these like picks heavy deals, but my feeling is like, when you trade a star like that, and the difference between your first like star and your second star is a huge gap, like it was for those teams, it is going to be so long until you approach what you did when that player was on the team, that like expecting any player you get back to be a part of that eventual team it kind of doesn't make sense. Like, it's probably not going to happen. So you might as well just take the picks and just admit to yourself that it's probably going to be 7 to 10 years before we get back to that same level. Like, that's usually what it costs when you trade a superstar like that. Like, Bill Simmons used to always talk about like trading, a quarter for $1. Like, that's what the superstar trades used to be like. And I think these trades nowadays are actually way more fair and give the fan base who's losing the star way more hope. Like that CP3 trade, Al-Farouq Aminu, Eric Gordon, Chris Kaman, and what turned out to be Austin Rivers with the 10th pick.
Right.
Like, that was with 2 years left on his deal, and he exercised the player option in that trade to go to the Clippers. Like, that is a franchise killer. Like,
and everyone thought Eric Gordon, it was basically a bet on Eric Gordon becoming a star, because at the time Eric Gordon was like, but like when that didn't work out, it's just like, oh shit, we're like, we have nothing. And then obviously, so what was it? 2 years later was it a year later, 2 years later when they got Anthony Davis? I can't even remember, but it was somewhere around that time. They fortunately were so bad that they were able to get Anthony Davis. But a lot of the times, like, for example, like what you're talking about right now, like why I didn't understand it. Well, obviously I have a lot invested in this because I wanted the original Harden to the Nets trade. I wanted the Sixers to trade Simmons and Thibault and picks or whatever for him.
Yeah.
And I remember being critical of Houston's approach, which I was like, you're not getting back like a good young player like Ben Simmons. Like, and now it's like, oh, duh, you trade for all those picks. The Nets could be a shit show. And now,
and even beyond that, Houston's been terrible now. Like, Houston doesn't get Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., whoever they're going to get this year, because they're going to be terrible again. Like, they're going to have 3 building blocks plus like Şengün and KPJ, whatever they turn into. So like, I just feel like if you're a team who gets into this position, the like future is so much brighter than it once was for teams in like the early 2010s when this would happen.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I know someone was making a joke. Like, a lot of people made jokes when the Bucks won the finals about like, oh, the Sixers traded Drew Holiday for Nerlens Noel and Dario Saric. Those were the 2 picks that they got for him. And it was like, he's like a 22-year-old all-star. And I remember being like, no, we traded for the right to be bad enough to get Joel Embiid. That was why we made that trade, because 2014 at the time, people thought that was going to be a really, really good draft. And we wanted to have one of the top picks in that draft. And then we actually were bad enough for the next 2 years following that it allowed us to get Ben Simmons. Like there is a luxury in at least being bad in a short time period. You don't have to tank for a decade. You can tank for a few years, and you can have you have more cracks at getting that next superstar player than if you were to trade for like a lower end all-star like Ben Simmons, or a sub all-star, like a good young player, but not someone who's really going to lift your franchise in the way that you're trading James Harden or Anthony Davis or one of these guys that we're talking about. But yeah, so I totally agree with that theory for sure. But all right, let's just talk a little bit about the trade grades at the time, because actually this was kind of seen as a win-win. And it kind of hits on your point of like, this made things a little bit more fair, because no one ever wanted to trade their star, because it would mean that they were just completely irrelevant and it was just going to destroy the franchise and all of that. But when you're getting back a haul like this, people looked at it more positively. CBS Sports gave the Lakers a B+ and the Pelicans an A+. The Athletic gave them a B+, the Lakers a B+ and the Pelicans an A. And Sports Illustrated actually gave the Lakers an A+ and the Pelicans a B+. So I remember Zach Lowe specifically saying at this time, it's a lot of picks. You know, what the final package was Ingram, Lonzo, Hart, picks that became Jackson Hayes, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and as you said, Herb Jones, and then also now Dyson Daniels, who they just got with the 8th pick in the draft, who I like him as a prospect. I think he could be pretty good. And then they'll also have a 2023 swap and a 2024 first. So they still have picks coming out from this. They got a bunch of decent young prospects, one that's already turned into an all-star level player. A few more, we'll see what happens with the other guys. But like, I remember Zach Lowe saying at the time, like, look, you can go through every trade, and obviously this changed the trade market a little bit and what superstars get back. But he's like, you could go back and you could look at every trade that is made, and the team that gets the best player almost always wins the trade. Yeah. Like, they got Anthony Davis, and when he was Anthony Davis of a few years ago, when he was still a top 10 player and he was relatively healthy, they won a title immediately. He's a defensive player of the year candidate, second best player on a championship team. Like, it's 100% worth it. And I know that Bill likes to revisit this and be like, I don't know, I still think the Lakers gave up too much. And I'm like, you win a championship, it doesn't matter to me. Like, I don't care what, like, the Lakers could have been the worst team in the league since the bubble, and it wouldn't matter. You won a title. Like, the point of trading for Anthony Davis was you win a title, and that's all that matters to me.
And they should be so thankful that they won that title, because if they had not won that title, oh my God, it would look so bad.
Yeah, exactly. Seriously.
Maybe such a huge swing.
Yeah. I mean, well, if you think about it, like, in the Western Conference, there really was no challenger for them. They kind of ran through the teams that they played in the West. The one what if from that bubble season is, what if Bam Adebayo and Goran Dragic didn't get hurt in game 1 of the finals? Because, look, do I think the Miami Heat were better? No. They had LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Obviously, I think the Lakers were better. And bubble Anthony Davis was shooting like prime Dirk. So obviously, I would still think that the Lakers would win that. But with the way that Jimmy Butler was playing, with the way that Bam Adebayo was playing and Goran Dragic were playing, like, they were really legitimately, they beat a really good Celtics team. They kicked the shit out of the Bucks. Like, I do think that the like you said, the Lakers fans should be thanking God every day they won that title. Because if they lose that and then the next 2 seasons happen, like, I don't think LeBron's there this year. I'll say that much.
All right, you want to go to the next one?
Yeah, let's go to the next one. We have so the results from that: Lakers win title. Pelicans have one of the best young cores in the NBA. So it worked out for both teams. All right, so the next one is Kyrie and KD to the Nets. I don't know if you remember this, but I found a tweet from Shams that was like 12 days before free agency that was like, Irving has begun communicating with top Celtics officials since the season ended with private and public signals that he'll leave the organization in free agency, likely for the Brooklyn Nets.
So this was one of the more surprising things to me. So I went back and found the betting odds, and this was from June 28th, 2019. So this is just a few days before free agency opened. For Kyrie, Brooklyn was number 1, minus 550. Like, everyone kind of knew at that point. Lakers plus 250, the Knicks plus 1100. For KD, at that exact same time, on that exact same day, the Knicks were number 1 at minus 300, that close to free agency. Everyone still thought KD was going to the Knicks. Brooklyn was second at plus 100, and then Golden State was at plus 235. And interestingly, I found odds from May, like the month before, and the Knicks odds had actually improved over that last month. The Knicks odds were plus 120 in May and went all the way to minus 300 a few days before free agency opened. So people thought that KD and Kyrie like weren't linked yet. Like, that the connection hadn't been made, at least in the betting markets. That's
so weird, because I remember specifically, like, I think it was from the All-Star game where they had like that footage of them like hanging out in the tunnel together, and they're talking, and everyone's like, it was kind of like when it was obvious LeBron was going to the Lakers, and he like talked to Lonzo and he covered up his mouth like this. It felt like it was kind of a foregone conclusion that those two were definitely going to play together. And
that's what I thought.
Yeah. And we knew, if we had known for this long that Kyrie was going there, how did the betting odds, maybe they were just trying to get a bunch of Knicks fans. Like, maybe, like, you know how betting markets do that sometimes, where they'll just be like, for example, every year, no matter how bad the Dallas Cowboys are, they always have like decent odds to win a championship because they know that their fans are just going to put a bunch of money on it.
Right.
And so I wonder if that was because they were just trying to get Knicks fans to bet on that. But like, generally speaking, these betting market things, like they at least have some inside information that would lead you to believe that they would not think that like KD could ever go to the Knicks and Kyrie to the Nets, because I remember KD announced this on the boardroom. He announced it.
Yeah.
And the funniest part about this was, I don't know if you remember this, they didn't even tell the Nets. They just did.
I don't remember that.
Yeah. So it was known apparently that Kyrie wanted to go to the Nets, but
yeah,
maybe we should have known from the jump that this was going to be a weird era of Nets basketball when like it came out like a day later that the Nets were like, yeah, they didn't even talk to us yet. And like KD goes on the boardroom and he's like, by the way, I'm signing with the Nets. And the Nets are like, yeah, of course we're going to take KD and Kyrie, but they had no idea apparently.
Well, to that point, I found a quote from Woj around when Kyrie signed, and he was explaining like why Kyrie went with the Nets. And it must have been on TV. And he said the reason why Kyrie has gravitated towards the Nets is because of their infrastructure. They have role players who can win games without him. I just thought it was funny that like from the jump, Kyrie is thinking about the Nets playing without him. Like from the very start of this entire experiment, Kyrie's like, that could be pretty good, even if I wasn't there.
Yeah. Oh, I love Kyrie. So he's such a funny character. But dude, but the funniest part about that is that if that's the reason you go there. So I think that was kind of a slight at the Knicks, I would imagine, because the Knicks did not have much talent at the time, and they were like, well, if we go to the Nets, at least like if I'm out with injury or KD is out for this whole season, then we'll be fine. Like we'll still win games, like whatever.
Right.
The funniest part about that to me is that if that were the case, wouldn't you just stay with the Celtics? They got to the Eastern Conference Finals without you like a year before. And then you just got back to the second round with them. Like if your whole thing is I want to miss a bunch of games, I don't know, maybe playing with Jason Tatum and Gordon Hayward and Jaylen Brown is a better option than playing with like Spencer Dinwiddie and Karis LeVert.
That does seem to make a lot of sense. I wanted
Kyrie
to bring
doesn't logically think of a lot of things when it comes to this stuff, though.
So I wanted to bring up Woj's initial tweet because it's very famous, especially among Nets fans. Brooklyn is making a clean sweep tonight. Brooklyn will sign Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and DeAndre Jordan. League sources tell ESPN. Clean sweep. They got all three of them.
Wow. How did they do it?
Well, that's actually what I want to ask you about. So you know that Kevin Durant went to the Nets in a sign and trade. D'Angelo Russell went back. Everyone understands why the Warriors did that. The Warriors didn't want to lose KD for nothing. And then we all know what happens. They turn him into Andrew Wiggins, Jonathan Kuminga. They win the title this year. Do you remember, or off the top of your head, do you know why Brooklyn did that?
Okay, so I don't remember. And I tried to find, first off, the pick that Brooklyn got turned into nothing.
Yes, because it was top 20 protected.
Yeah.
And the Warriors are like bombed the next season. And so like it didn't even matter. And it turns into a second round pick 6 years in the future.
Oh, yeah.
Like the most bizarre pick.
But why did they was it a favor for someone?
So it's really weird. So Tim Kawakami from The Athletic, I think this article was right before this most recent finals.
Okay.
But when they initially signed KD and Kyrie, they both had $4 to $5 million in unlikely bonuses in their contracts, which generated this extra $10 million the Nets could use on DeAndre Jordan. Okay. But then Golden State approached them about a sign and trade, and the Nets found out that they could reduce those unlikely bonuses, which they weren't going to get, like KD and Kyrie, down to only $1 million for Kyrie. So basically giving KD and Kyrie an extra $10 million, and they can just sign DeAndre Jordan outright.
Okay.
And because the initial report from Woj was that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving are taking less than the max to allow DeAndre Jordan to get the $10 million annual salary. They actually didn't do that because of the sign and trade. So like the entire reason for the Golden State title is because like KD and Kyrie didn't want to take like a little bit of a cut
for their friend who sucked.
To get DeAndre Jordan on a 4-year, $40 million deal.
Like, it's amazing. Absolutely masterclass. This is that is so, because I couldn't even first off, it took me a while to find the protections on the pick. I was like, are they trying to hide this? Because I feel like the Nets do not want it out there that they got nothing. Basically, they got a future second from 2025, like you said.
Well, so the pick thing was that KD didn't want to be traded for D'Lo straight up because he thought like the value was way off.
It's a bad look.
Yeah, so he was like demanding that they put in a pick, and then Brooklyn sent out Treveon Graham and Shabazz Napier. Those were the contracts they need to get rid of to be able to sign DeAndre Jordan to a 4 years, $40 million deal.
Yeah, no, I remember that because I was like, we couldn't just get Shabazz Napier. I was like, really?
Oh, really?
Like, I was like, come on, like we don't have anyone who can dribble a basketball, and you're telling me we can't get Shabazz Napier. And then like a year and a half later, he's out of the league, and I was like, all right, maybe that's why. Maybe that's why it happened. Treveon Graham was also out of the league shortly after that, and I saw some Sixers fans saying they also wanted him. So.
But yeah, so you got to give KD like a little credit for this most recent Warriors title. Like it literally would not have been possible without him agreeing to all this, and also like wanting to not take that cut so that they could just sign DeAndre Jordan outright.
Do you remember, and this is something that I vividly remember, was that like the second that they acquired D'Angelo Russell, they were like, oh yeah, they're trading him.
Oh, I found a quote. Mark Stein on the Dan Patrick Show on July 1st. D'Angelo Russell does not fit there whatsoever. They just did not want to see KD walk out the door with no compensation. They will trade him. It's just a matter of when. That was July 1st.
We're like, yeah, we got it. We're going to bring him in our culture and immediately ship him out. That's Warriors culture for you. But honestly, like, I remember at the time being like, you know what? If there's one team that D'Angelo Russell can work on, it's the Warriors, because the Warriors just keep getting away with this over and over and over. But the plan from the jump was really, we're going to try to build up his value, maybe boost his stats, whatever. I don't even think he was that good for the Warriors stats-wise. That team was terrible. His advanced stats were certainly bad. I remember from that season, but I'm sure everyone on that team's advanced stats were bad. And then they trade him at the deadline for Wiggins, which obviously, like, Wiggins was arguably their second best player this year. Yeah. It's not just like, oh, Andrew Wiggins was a important player. He was like the second or third, depending on how you view Draymond, most important player on a Warriors championship team this year, to the point where that might be the reason why Kevin Durant wants to leave Brooklyn. Because there are reports that have come out from Woj that are basically like, yeah, he's kind of pissed the Warriors won a title before he did, and he might want to try to win one somewhere else now because it's a bad look for him. And it's like, you're the reason that this could have happened.
And I think an important point that I forgot, but before this all went down, there actually was like a legit market for D'Angelo Russell.
There was,
there were multiple teams interested in him that summer, and it actually was a very weird ending to that whole thing for him, because when Kyrie initially signed, they were about to make D'Angelo Russell unrestricted free agent, so he could have just signed anywhere. And like the Lakers wanted to meet with him, and like they were talking about a reunion. Like obviously we know now that like Minnesota would have been very interested in that, and so I think from Golden State's perspective, they were like, oh, this guy has a ton of value. We're going to be able to flip this so easily. In retrospect, it like seems amazing that they did it because of how we think of D'Angelo Russell now.
Sure.
But yeah, his perception was totally different at that time.
Yeah. He was coming off an all-star game. He had that I remember nerdy people being like, beware of D'Angelo Russell season. Because he was shooting like an incredible percentage on floaters. He was shooting way above his head in the mid-range and from three. And they were like, this might just be a heater. And like, he could easily regress back to who he was the year before, which is like a fine player, but like not someone you want to give a max contract to. And that's kind of exactly what happened. Like they kind of nailed that. And I do remember because the Lakers were like, if we don't get Kawhi, our backup plan is bringing back D'Angelo Russell, having him be the third guy with AD and LeBron, because they had cap space. Minnesota was like pretty much like thought it was a done deal. They were getting D'Lo once he was walking. They were like, oh, we're just going to get D'Lo, and they wouldn't have even had to give up the Wiggins and the 7th pick. Like, it's definitely brutal in retrospect, but also Minnesota's doing fine. Like they're doing great. But yeah, the perception at that time, I remember being like, I don't want D'Angelo Russell because I just watched Ben Simmons embarrass him in the playoffs. Like I know Ben Simmons is a great defender, but he had outside of game one, he had D'Angelo Russell in hell, and I was like, not for me, not for me personally. But all right, so
before we go off
yes.
of this one, I want to read you a little excerpt from Marcus Thompson. He wrote an article right after KD went to Brooklyn, and I think this is so foreboding. These words that he said. He's explaining like why KD made this move. He said it wasn't about money for Durant. It wasn't about the best opportunity to win a championship, and this clearly wasn't primarily about validating his legacy either. The decision by Durant revealed what he valued most: friendship. And like that really does sum up like the entire like Brooklyn experience, like this friendship with Kyrie.
Yeah,
that was the reason he did all this, and we obviously now we've seen where this has led.
Yeah,
but that was kind of like the idea from the beginning. Like it was about just.
It's got to the point where he basically made a trade request because his friend didn't get paid. Like
right,
at least if we are to believe what reporters have been saying, which is basically that like. He was willing to let the James Harden thing kind of go because of Kyrie. He was willing to let the team suffer this year because of Kyrie. And now he wants to help Kyrie get paid. And that was very, very creepy that he said that. And it's exactly what happened basically when he got that. Although I do think that he cared. Honestly, I think the reason he left Golden State was because he cared too much about his legacy, because people didn't take him seriously, even though he won 2 finals MVPs and was like at worst a 1A on those title teams. I still think Steph was like probably the best one in terms of like impact, just because Steph is like incredible in that regard. But like Kevin Durant was very, very important for those teams. And in the amount of disrespect that he did get is kind of crazy considering how good he was for them.
Oh yeah. I found an article from Marcus Speers where, Kendrick Perkins had talked to KD right after he made the move, and Kendrick was all talking about that, like how disrespected he was in Golden State. And then there was all that weird injury stuff. Like remember Iguodala was on his book tour and talking about like how he had an injury the previous year and he thought it had been either misdiagnosed or like in the media they were calling it a bone bruise, and he was like it's a fracture, and he was having all this pressure to come back. And then Jay Williams on ESPN was talking about he thought that KD had been misdiagnosed and that there was like a rift within the organization and KD over the injury stuff.
Yeah, I remember that.
There's
and
all
like,
that weird stuff going on.
They said they thought that the medical staff rushed him back. And then KD had to come out and be like, actually, no, I was like, I wanted to play, and then he tore his Achilles or whatever. And like, that makes sense. I mean, Kevin Durant is like a hooper. Like he's like, I want to play literally all the time, which is why I don't think that he'll hold out. But yeah, no, I vaguely remember that stuff happening as well. That was just such a weird, apparently that last year with the Warriors was like every Steve Kerr says he like hated coming to work. Like,
that's why I don't get the sign and trade. Like to this day, like why did KD agree to do that? You would think if there was like that much like animus between those two parties, why would he have helped Golden State out in that instance and essentially like long-term gifted them a title 3 years later?
Yeah, it's kind of weird
series of events, but yeah.
I feel like I remember people saying this is insane at the time and being like, why is he doing this? Because the Warriors would be kind of fucked. Like they would have no outlets to get much better if they didn't get any sort of contract that they could trade, because they were already over. They were paying Steph a ton. They had Draymond and Clay locked up. Like they really gave them an out to make this second wave of the Warriors championship run in a way that they would not have had if that sign and trade did not happen. But yeah. All right. So yeah, results from this: Nets win 1 playoff series so far, are in absolute shambles. Fucking crazy. It's insane to me that they've only won 1. I know that KD was out the first year, so that's an important part of it. But like, considering what we all thought the Nets were going to be, especially when they got James Harden, it's insane they've still only won 1 series. And the Warriors end up with another title thanks to the Wiggins trade, as we said. What's going on, guys? I am excited to talk once again about Philly Sports Trips, the official travel partner of the You Know Ball podcast. So Philly Sports Trips has a ton of great trips coming up, specifically some Eagles trips coming up. It's not that far away. Eagles season's right around the corner. On September 11th, you can go see in Detroit, you can see the Eagles kick off their season versus the Detroit. Wait, hold on. Is that the first game of the season? Yes. Okay. Fuck. I should have stuck with that. Sweet. All right. What's going on, guys? I am very excited to announce that Philly Sports Trips is the official travel partner of the You Know Ball podcast. And Philly Sports Trips has a lot of great upcoming trips, specifically for the Eagles season. The Eagles season is right around the corner. So book your trips now. You'll get a 5-star hotel. You'll get flight or bus there, and you will also get a great tailgate filled with Philly sports fans, drinks, food, everything that you could possibly ask for. They will be kicking off their season on September 11th in Detroit versus the Detroit Lions. You do not want to miss that. Our friends from Bell and the Birdman will be going to every game this season. Another one that they will be doing is the FedEx trip down to Washington to play against the Commanders and Carson Wentz, our best friend. They are bringing a ton of buses filled with Eagles fans. It's going to be awesome. It's basically going to be like a home game in Washington, so you do not want to miss that at all. They have a ton of other trips that you can check out on their website, phillysportstrips.com. When you book your trip, make sure that you mention the You Know Ball podcast and the Bell and the Birdman sent you. So please support Philly Sports Trips. It helps support the podcast, and also you'll just have a great time. So definitely check them out. Link is in the description. Thank you once again. Okay, so moving on to the next one, we have the Sixers had a great rebuild on the fly this summer. They brought in a lot of good character guys, good locker room guys. So first off, I just want to put it in perspective. I remember the night before Jimmy Butler and JJ Redick and everyone that was on the Sixers, it was announced where they were going the next day. I remember the night before, there's an account called Did the Sixers Win on Twitter, and Sixers fans will remember this, where they tweeted the Sixers basically, they had made a push towards like getting Malcolm Brogdon. That didn't work. He obviously ends up with the Pacers. You know, they're going to trade Jimmy to Miami, and they're going to get back Josh Richardson. They're going to get Al Horford as a free agent. And then they like tweeted out like the starting 5, which was like Simmons, Richardson, Tobias, Horford, Embiid. And my first reaction was, what the fuck is this? I was like, this is a disaster. Why would we ever do this? Why would we sign another center when our best player is a center? And why are we trading Jimmy Butler to one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference from the past decade? Like, why are we giving him to like a good organization? Like, I was furious. I was also mad we were letting JJ Redick walk, because at the time JJ was still a very important player for the Sixers. And it was reported that he was not coming back. And I was like, this feels really bad to me. Of course, like any fan, I talked myself into it pretty much within 2 or 3 days. Like, and I was like, this is it. We're winning the title. The 2019-2020, the Twin Towers of Horford and Embiid, and Ben Simmons is going to keep taking leaps. And look, Tobias Harris, maybe we gave him a $180 million contract. He's probably not that good, but you got to overpay for these guys sometimes. You know, you got to overpay for the Tobias Harrises of the world. And Josh Richardson's basically Drew Holiday. So we're chilling. We have 5 all-stars basically in our starting lineup, is what I said to myself. And I don't know if you remember this, but the national media was like, the Sixers nailed the offseason. The Sixers killed it.
Oh, I remember Zach Lowe specifically like loving the idea of like the weirdo Sixers, and actually found like an entire article he wrote about them in November of that year. And listen to this line. What a great sentence here. After years of absurdist drama, the process, the resignation letter, Markelle Fultz, the Brian Colangelo Twitter scandal, last season's roster upheaval, the Sixers are counting on a new tranquility to grease the team's development. Now, is that what happened, Trill? Did they get some new tranquility?
Yes. Yeah, no. It was all, we were singing Kumbaya in the locker room. Everyone loved Brett Brown. Al Horford and Joel Embiid got along famously. Embiid didn't feel threatened by the fact that they signed another center to, maybe take his job or whatever. It definitely wasn't pointing in the direction of the team building around Ben Simmons and caring more about Ben Simmons than Joel Embiid. I say all of this to say that obviously it sucked because immediately we were like, all right, first off, the team started the next year like 5-0. And we were like, oh my God, they figured it out. And then we hit a wall when we were like, oh shit, you have to have players who can like dribble a basketball on your team in the modern NBA, and also players who can shoot a basketball, to the point where we had Shake Milton, who had not played real NBA minutes, starting as our point guard by the time the bubble came around. Like, we were just throwing everything at the wall because it was just like very obvious this fit did not work. And it was incredibly infuriating to watch Jimmy Butler go to the Miami Heat and be like, instantly make them title contenders, bring them to the finals, be the best player on a finals team. And it was a very bad year for me, particularly because I was the guy so I have a new Twitter account, but at the time I had my old Twitter account. And on there, I had started a joke about Jimmy Butler retiring and going to Miami because all old people retire to Florida. And everyone loved that joke for like months. And then the Heat were better than us. And I was like, okay, maybe this joke did not age particularly well. But the silver lining for Sixers fans that came out of this is that year was such a disaster that they were like, okay, we can't have 7 GMs anymore. Because we had a collective, like Elton Brand was like the GM, but like we had like 4 or 5 guys. We had like Ned Cohen, Alec Rucker, Josh Harris was involved in decisions. Like that kind of made them realize like, yeah, maybe we should go back to just having one guy make the decisions, like not this collective front office or whatever. And the year's such a disaster. They fired Brett Brown, even though I still don't know what happened with the Jimmy Butler thing. I don't think that they would have ever kept Brett Brown over Jimmy Butler when it seemed like they were going to fire him if they lost in those playoffs the year before. Everyone on the Sixers, like Sixers fans and like even the team, they were tweeting, like Ben Simmons tweeted like #RunItBack, and Jimmy Butler liked it.
Can I give you some quotes from that time? Like June 26th, 2 Woj tweets. 1, the Sixers plan to be aggressive in signing Butler to a new deal. 2, the Sixers have been expressing confidence throughout the NBA that they'll be able to sign Butler and Tobias Harris to new deals. And to that point, on June 28th, the odds for Jimmy Butler, Philadelphia was number 1 at +150. Number 2 was the Brooklyn Nets at +800. And number 3 was the Knicks at +900. Like no one was even thinking really about the Miami Heat at that point.
It's so funny because I have a friend who's like hyper negative about the Sixers, like to the point where I'm like, you just like, I have to watch the team all the time. And like, I have a podcast about them. Can you not just text me every time they lose a game in January and like be like threatening to end your life over this? Like, it's not a big deal. Like, and he was like, specifically was like, don't count out the Heat. And I was like, the Heat have no cap space. They have no roads to get Jimmy Butler. Like, how could they possibly get him? Like, little did I know, the mafia man in South Beach, Pat Riley, was behind the scenes for years. He sent Dwayne Wade as an operative to Chicago to be like, listen, Jimmy, you got to get more respect than this. You think you're a star player. You think that this is how star players get treated? You got to get more respect, to the point where he forces himself out of his next 2 teams. Then he gets to free agency and has a choice of where to go. And where does he choose to go? Miami. And the thing about this is like the Sixers fucked up, obviously, if they pulled the max contract. From everything that Jimmy Butler said, it sounded like he didn't want to take the max from the Sixers because he said that he heard that someone said that we need to be able to control Jimmy if we give him this max contract. And he said, no one can control me. Like, that was his whole thing. Jimmy says a lot of things, though, so I don't really know what to believe and what not to believe. But like, kind of the whole point on this is like, they went to him and they said, look, you can go find a sign and trade somewhere, which I know that teams do that with players to make agents happy and to make the players happy and whatever. But at the same time, like, you can't just be like, yeah, go wherever, and then like not get something back better than Josh Richardson. Like, you couldn't have gotten Tyler Hero. Like, you couldn't have gotten like at least a prospect. Like I don't think you would have gotten Bam Adebayo or whatever, but like Miami had to play ball with you. And what they did was they gave you Josh Richardson. They sent out Hassan Whiteside, who ended up in Portland because of this.
Yeah.
And like they got off that contract cleanly somehow. They basically just moved a bunch of money around so that they could bring Jimmy in. And the Sixers were just like, yeah, that's fine. We'll just take Josh Richardson and move on. It's just crazy to me.
Josh Richardson on Basketball Reference, like so many career highs that last year in Miami. So many career highs.
It's just, and this is once again why like people will always talk about like, oh, why don't I see Heat fans on Twitter a lot being like, these guys like Gabe Vincent and Max Strus, like they should have real trade value. Like people don't take them seriously. I'm like, how many times do guys leave Miami and just suck? Like, I feel like this is like, there's like a long history. Like Pat Riley, I thought Pat Riley had learned his lesson. Like, oh, don't sign guys that are really good here because we can just find like, don't sign Duncan Robinson to a 5-year, $100 million contract. We can just find Max Strus. Like we don't have to do that. Because we're the Heat and Spoelstra has this great movement system and everyone looks better here and shoots better here and all of that. But apparently, like, I'm just very weary of getting anyone from Miami. And I think Josh Richardson cursed me. Luckily, they were able to flip him and turn him into Seth Curry, who was a very good player for us, and then was part of the James Harden trade. So it didn't turn out to be too terrible, but that also led, this offseason also led to Daryl Morey being hired, like I said before. So all things considered, pretty bad, but they were able to recover at least somewhat. The Tobias Harris contract is probably the thing that hurt them the most from this offseason, because it seems to be incredible. Like, one of the things I talked about is like this entire offseason can pretty much all lead directly to OKC's rebuild. Like, just from this alone, the Sixers had to salary dump Al Horford to you guys for a year later for the 2020. You guys got a 2025 first and Al Horford and the rights to Vasilij Micic,
who's been torturing us ever since.
Yeah. Okay. Let's just do a little quick aside on Micic.
Yeah, Micic. That's right.
Okay. Yeah. I was like, this guy's the savior. Like, I was like, for like 2 years, I was like, oh, we're going to get like our point guard that can come over here and can dribble, pass, and shoot, and he's going to be he's going to be our starting point guard, like all this shit. And then Morey got there and immediately was like, we're trading this. Like, we're not waiting around for this dude anymore. And every single offseason, we hear these, hey, he might come over. He might come over. And now,
every year it gets like juicier and juicier. Like this year, we actually got a Woj tweet about it, which was like, oh my gosh, this has to be real now. And of course, it's never real. And of course, I'm thinking like maybe we'll get like a late first at best. Sure. This is what I'm like building up in my head that I'm getting so excited about. And it like ultimately wouldn't even matter.
Yeah. And he did not come over once again, or at least has not to this point. Like,
he did not.
Chicago's wanted him for 2 years now.
The Bucks were interested.
Yeah, the Bucks were interested this year. Yeah, he's never coming over. And it was so funny because earlier this offseason, when Sixers fans were like, oh, he's going to come over, I was like, he's not coming over. Don't worry about it. He's what everyone said Dario Saric was, which Dario Saric is never coming over. Micic is the guy that is never actually coming over. He's like, what is he, like 28 now? Like, I think at this point, like, if he's not coming over now, he's probably not coming over to his 30s.
Let's wait for next summer, Trill. I think there might be something brewing. Okay. I have one more detail for you to get you very excited. So you mentioned the sign-in trades possibilities with Butler. The big one that was being talked about all through the media at this time was Houston. Houston was like desperate to get Jimmy Butler. And I had totally forgotten that when Jimmy Butler was traded from Minnesota, the Rockets had offered them 4 future first-round picks for Jimmy Butler before they did the deal with Philly. And it was all because of Tibbs, because, you know, he just wants to win. So what does he care about picks? Sure. But that could have been like the first of these like super new era of superstar trades. True. So then the next summer, they're offering up Capella, Eric Gordon, PJ Tucker, trying to get a first-round pick that they can then trade to Philly. And Bill Simmons on his pod said, can you imagine if you were Philly and you have to do a sign and trade for Jimmy Butler and all you get back is Eric Gordon and PJ Tucker, which is so funny because like 3 years later, it's exactly who the targets are for the Sixers.
We need them. But also, I do just want to say, I remember at that offseason, because Chris Paul was also, there were also rumors around Chris Paul.
Yeah.
But Chris Paul was seen as such a negative contract, which we'll get to in a little bit, that we were all like, we're not going to take on Chris Paul. Are you kidding me? Like, little did we know, if we just traded for Chris Paul instead of Josh Richardson, that team's actually pretty fucking good. Like, that's a very, like, he kind of makes the pieces fit a little bit better, at least. And
if you had known he was plant-based.
Yeah.
That was the detail.
Yeah.
That was it.
I know. It boosts the value so much when you go vegan. I know. I was vegan for 5 years. So, all right. So yeah. So basically, like I said, this had a major impact because OKC gets him, and then you guys flip him for Kemba and the 16th pick, which turns into Şengün, who you guys flip to Detroit for Detroit and Washington first. So you get two picks from that, and then you end up flipping those 2 picks with another Denver protected first.
That's right.
This year at the draft for Ousmane Dieng or Zheng.
That's right. That's
so
right.
Your boy.
I wasn't a huge fan. I have not seen enough to make me a fan. A lot of Thunder fans want me to be a fan. They want me to be joining the Zheng gang, but not yet. I need to see a lot more.
Yeah, I don't. After Summer League, I don't blame you, especially with how good the other young guys played for you.
I know.
But yeah. But yeah, so that ended up being the outcome of that. Obviously, Miami makes it to an Eastern Conference Finals this year, almost gets back to the finals. They make it to the finals in the bubble. Since then, the Sixers have gotten swept by the Celtics in the bubble. Great. Lose in the second round of the Hawks. I'm going to die. And then lose in the second round to the Heat. I'm throwing up all over myself. All right. So okay, that's it. We're moving on to the next thing, which is, this is just a brief one. Kemba goes to the Celtics, which we just mentioned. Obviously, it worked out for them. It was like a pretty good year, or first year at least, was great. They get to the Eastern Conference Finals. Kemba's knee, Nick Nurse apparently ran it into the ground during the All-Star game. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, yeah.
There was that whole thing. And then Kemba ends up getting dumped to you guys, as we mentioned. Then they get Horford back, who helps them make a run. There really wasn't much to this other than the fact that, like, I guess there was the Rozier sign-in trade. This was Kemba was just kind of seen as like the replacement for Kyrie. And I remember being like, no one took the Celtics seriously as contenders because they had just come off the disaster season. They lost Horford and Kyrie and only replaced them with Kemba. And we were all like, don't take them seriously. And then they immediately made it to the Eastern Conference Finals.
So the most interesting detail from this, I found Shams reported the actual final offer from Charlotte, which was 5 years, $160 million. That's what they offered to Kemba that he turned down. He ended up taking 142 from Boston, and then he took a slight buyout with OKC and then got 217 from the Knicks. He would have made more money had he stayed in Charlotte in retrospect, which I thought was interesting because that was the whole deal. Like, he felt like he was being disrespected in Charlotte. He did not want to leave Charlotte. He is like the Dame Lillard, a less successful version, no offense, of Dame Lillard, where he was like super loyal to that city and wanted to stay there. And they ended up offering him more than he would have made, but he left them and went to Boston.
And he was on that. But I think the reason he felt so disrespected by the Hornets because he was on that really cheap contract for like 4 years, like $48 million or something.
Right.
That he was on, and he was like, "Now it's my time to get paid." And I've made multiple All-Star teams during this cheap ass contract, and you're not going to pay me.
And that was such a huge turning point for them because if they had Kemba, like that next season, they won 23 games. They get LaMelo. Completely changes the franchise. And that obviously would not have happened if Kemba had stayed.
Yeah, I that's another good point. Like, just letting a guy walk sometimes isn't the worst thing in the world when you can have a chance at getting a guy who probably will end up even better than Kemba was, to be honest.
Yeah.
So yeah, that one, kind of just a brief touch on that just because it was impactful. Obviously them getting Kemba kind of weirdly led to them getting Horford, which helped them get back to the finals. And now they'll probably be at least the co-favorites in the East for another season. So, oh God, that offseason really fucked me up, dude. All right. So let's move on to the fun stuff, which is your OKC Thunder, which we got to just talk about the Paul George and Kawhi thing before it actually happened, because
Well,
we
I want
talk.
to start off with
Yeah.
a question for you, okay, to
Yes.
set the
I need to
stage.
hear this. Okay.
Because for people out there, if you don't remember, this is third year post KD. We
Mhm.
have not won a playoff series since KD left.
Sure.
First it was to the Rockets. Can't play Cantor. That was that. Then we lost to rookie Donovan Mitchell. Uh, Russ started a blood feud with Ricky Rubio for some reason, and we lost in embarrassing fashion. And then the next year was that Blazers series where not only does Dame hit that shot at the end, but Enes Cantor completely dominates Steven Adams in
Yep.
a super embarrassing way. And so at that point, I'm just like totally out on the future of this team. I've been run down by this team. Do you remember where Sam Presti was on day one of free agency?
Mike Muscala, was that
He
related to
was
it?
at Mike Muscala's house in Minnesota, recruiting
Yes,
him to OKC.
that's
The
right.
summer where everything was about to blow up, and Sam Presti's at Mike Muscala's house in Minnesota, getting him to sign on the dotted line.
You know why I know that, right?
Why do you know that?
Because Mike Muscala provided me with one of, not when he was a Sixer, but he provided me
Oh,
with
the
one of the
Tyrese
greatest,
Maxey.
the
Yeah.
Tyrese Maxey shot. I remember, because I also wanted to bring Muscala back because I was like, we could use a stretch big, like whatever, but like he loves it in OKC, obviously. But no, I remember specifically being like, why does Presti care so much? And like, I think that made Muscala feel so valued that he's like, yeah, I'll just play the rest of my career here.
Oh, he took a $1 million pay cut this summer just to stay in Oklahoma City. But yeah,
Amazing.
that summer before all this went down, they also signed Alec Burks. So like
Mhm.
internally, like they were not thinking of this is going to be the summer we blow it up.
Right.
I had a feeling they probably would have run it back one more year. And then at that point, Russ would have had like 3 years left. Paul George would
Sure.
have had 2 years left. Then you can still trade them.
Yeah.
But then everything blew up.
So one of the things that I give Presti credit for, and we've talked about this before on the podcast, is the fact that when guys sign contracts, he apparently has this little bit of like kind of handshake agreement of like, look, if things don't really work out, like when Paul George came back, it was a really big surprise. We thought he was
Yeah.
going to go to the Lakers. We thought he was going to leave for nothing. And like, you guys had only had him for a year at the time, I believe,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. And he goes there, he buys in. Him, Presti obviously has an agreement with him. Like, look, if things don't work out in a year or two from now, like we'll have another conversation. Like if there are any trades out there, if there are teams that have things that we want, we can make a trade work, whatever. Like he did the same thing with Chris Paul. It seems like he probably knew that it was time to end things. Honestly, probably had a slight feeling in the back of his head, like, I really would I like to rebuild. Like it's fun to do a rebuild, like build your own team from scratch. And then when the Clippers come to him with that offer, it's like, how can you turn that kind of deal down? Especially when he's just pillaging, adding more and more picks, getting Shea in the trade and all of that. Like he probably was like, this is the perfect start to the rebuild. And then obviously we'll get into the Russ stuff later.
And this is true for a lot of these new deals. They end up being like perfect storms. And this was just a perfect storm for Presti. The idea that this trade could be pitched from the other team's perspective as, oh no, we're getting Paul George and Kawhi. So you have to include everything we gave out as both of those. Like it's a package deal, which
Brilliant.
like fine, like however you need to sell it. Like only one team's getting all the good stuff. So
yeah,
I was it like I remember the Woj tweet, or do you have it? The Woj tweet,
I don't have the Woj tweet. Oh no, I do. Yeah, I do. Because I woke up to this and was like, okay, so this might have been the beginning of my slop addiction, because I was very into this offseason. I was very interested, but the Sixers at least took me out of it for a little bit just because I felt like they had botched it, and then I talked myself back into it. Obviously, we had to wait for a week, and we were all going insane during that week. Like,
yes.
People were talking, like people were tracking the flights, the private airplanes that were leaving Toronto to go to LA. And then like we were all like trying to figure it out. We were trying to put the pieces together. Like, what does this mean? We all thought that Kawhi was going to go to the Lakers and ruin the NBA again, just like KD and the Warriors did. Like there was all of this shit that was out there. And then when we wake up to the Woj tweet, my brain just like dopamine overload.
Because he specifically said like trading for Shea, Gallo, and a record-breaking number of picks or something like that.
Yeah, the first tweet was Oklahoma City is trading all-star Paul George to the Los Angeles Clippers for a record-setting collection of draft choices.
Yeah.
League sources tell ESPN. And then the second one was Kawhi Leonard has been recruiting Paul George to find a way to get the Clippers in LA, pulled it off tonight. George goes to the Clippers with Leonard, and together they will walk into the Staples Center to go head-to-head with the Lakers, LeBron James, and Anthony Davis. So... And then there was also something about obviously what the actual return was, like Shea, Gallo, and all that and stuff.
And the part that I had kind of forgotten was, and this is true with like a lot of these new deals. It's like, who are you bidding against? And so like who are the Lakers bidding against for Anthony Davis? And it's the same thing with the Clippers. Like, who are they bidding against? Bruce Arthur of the Toronto Star reported that the Thunder had asked Toronto for Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, and 4 unprotected firsts as a starting point for Paul George. And then there was more that came out
and
like after that.
Russell Westbrook was also potentially in the trade there too.
Yeah. So they were trying to pawn both of them off to Toronto with the same idea that like you're getting both of these guys, but you get to keep Kawhi.
Right.
And the reporting after that was so interesting because Paul George was not Kawhi's first call by all indications. Like he called KD and he also called Jimmy Butler to team up in LA. And Paul George was like the third choice on that list.
Yeah, it's so funny because I remember at the press conference they like asked him like, you know, like why would you choose Paul George? And he was like, you know, we both got drafted by the Pacers, and because Kawhi got drafted on draft night, thought he was going to the Pacers and got traded to the Spurs. And he was like, you know, I always wondered like what would have happened if we stayed together. And I was like, well, obviously not that much. You were literally calling Kevin Durant and Jimmy Butler first. And you're like, all right, look, if I can't get Kevin Durant and Jimmy Butler, Paul George is a fine third. Also funny that he would go to the guy that's from California third. Isn't Paul George from the LA area? Like, that's why everyone thought he was going to go to the Lakers. So it's funny that he was like, all right, let me call him last. But yeah, no. So
you mentioned how crazy, like how long we had to wait. And like, just looking at the betting odds. So May 28th, the Clippers were number one, -200. Toronto was +125. A month later, June 28th, right before the start of free agency, Toronto was number one as -250. And the Clippers were +190. And listening back to these Simmons podcasts, like they thought the Clippers had blown it. Like everyone thought that the Clippers were going to come out of this summer with no one. And Mark Stein actually reported, I had totally forgotten this. The Clippers attempted to buy the rights to the claw logo from Nike in the hopes of presenting it to Kawhi at the meeting, at like the free agency meeting.
They do the Blake Griffin thing where they did like Blake Griffin, like they did like important figures in history, and it was like Martin Luther King, Blake Griffin,
pioneers.
Yeah, exactly. Obama. There was a lot of weird stuff because the Clippers had been going to Raptors games wearing Clippers like scouts, like going to games wearing Clipper stuff and just like watching Kawhi, and like. Apparently there was like talks of like Uncle Dennis getting money wired to him. Like there was a lot of crazy shit that had come out at this time. I don't know how much of that stuff was true, but like they were obviously courting him very heavily. And I do remember this idea that the Clippers had fucked up because it was taking so long that we're like, if he was going to the Clippers, he would have just made the choice already. Like he would have just went there. Like now he's obviously mulling over other options, but little did we know that behind the scenes they were trying to make that attempt to get the other star to pair with him, which like people make a lot of this. I don't really blame Kawhi, and I don't really blame the Clippers, especially because like, look, the result of this was they made it to their first Western Conference Finals ever. Like even if they don't win a title, which is obviously the goal, and they should be at least in the conversation if Kawhi is Kawhi next year, then like you still got to look at it. Like, I know that they get a lot of shit for trading all the picks and for trading Shea and all that stuff, but like going for a guy that's in his prime, that was, by the way, Paul George was what, third in MVP voting the year before?
Yeah.
Like I remember specifically losing my mind after the bubble. I have a tweet from that time where I said, Ryan Russillo just said he would never max Paul George, even though he just was third in MVP voting a year before. Like Paul George getting that version of Paul George in his prime made a lot of sense, even if you had to overpay, because like the way the Clippers got those picks were like, they got two of them from the Tobias Harris trade. Like, I think they might have got one from the original trade where they traded Blake Griffin for Tobias Harris. So, like, they were building up to this moment. Like, everything that they had done for the past few years was leading up to the moment that they could trade for a star to pair with Kawhi Leonard, who they were courting.
Yeah, and that's why it was so interesting listening back and realizing that people really thought they had like screwed it up, and that the Lakers thing towards the end had become like so loud. I found a really funny quote. So Kawhi was going to have a meeting with the Lakers, and he only wanted to have it with Jeannie Buss and Magic Johnson, who technically wasn't with the organization anymore at that point. So they end up having a phone call with Magic, and one of Kawhi's uncle's questions was, what's really going on in the organization between you, Jeannie, Rob Pelinka, everyone? Is it as dysfunctional as we're reading and hearing? And the response from Magic was, we had some issues, but we're past that. I'm past that. We're still a family, such as you fight with your brothers and sisters sometimes. Well, I had somewhat of a disagreement with my sister, and Rob Pelinka, yes, I said he was a backstabber, but that happened then. Now I want the Lakers to be a championship team.
Yeah.
So like reading it after it all went down, everyone kind of felt like Kawhi was leading the Lakers along that entire time and was never really serious about joining the Lakers, despite what some in the media were saying at the time, which maybe we can get into like the media.
Our boy, Ari Abraham, or the other one, because this was a character that I had forgotten from the 2019 offseason, which was Ari Abraham, which was a USC student at the time who was like, I have connections, and I don't know, maybe I have a rich dad or something, so I know NBA people, and he was reporting all this stuff, and he was basically building up this Kawhi to the Lakers hype for weeks. And the week of, literally tweeted, Kawhi Leonard has ruled out the Clippers, sources say. And this was after Kendrick Perkins was talking about the Lakers getting Kawhi Leonard, basically, and like making a full push and getting him and blah, blah, blah. But there were some other interesting ones that you had mentioned, the actual journalists and like the online conspiracy stuff.
Yeah, so like a few more. So Ari Abraham, if you don't know, the reason why anyone was even paying attention to him was because in 2013, when he was like 16, he would go to these hotels where NBA players like were meeting with agents, and he actually got real news of what teams Dwight Howard was meeting with. And so based on that, he started to like be looked at as legitimate in some way because he had gotten this one thing right
6 years ago.
Yes. And so then fast forward to 2019, and my favorite tweet of his was July 1st, 2019. I'm told the Clippers are now in panic mode, sources say. But there was and he had his own hashtag count on Ari. Like, you got to count on him because he's really good. What another thing about him? So Adrian Wojnarowski reported, this was like, I think in 2013, that same summer, Corey Brewer was a free agent at the time. And Woj has said that Corey Brewer had phone conversation with the Rockets, Celtics, and Knicks. Ari Abraham directly responded to Woj, saying that Brewer had in fact not spoken to the Rockets on the phone. He had instead spoke face-to-face with Rockets GM Daryl Morey. He posted a picture to prove his point, but the picture was of Corey Brewer and Kevin McHale. But, he got it pretty close. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty good for a 16-year-old. I got to give him credit.
But there was a different guy. So this guy started on Reddit, RD Ambition.
Yes. This was something I totally forgot.
I had forgotten about this too. And he had started reporting that linking Kawhi to the Lakers, a bunch of like sleuths on the internet dug into his background and found out whether this is real or not. They thought that he was the nephew of Jeannie Buss.
Yep.
And so he moves to Twitter, instantly gets like 34,000 followers, all Lakers fans, of course.
Of course.
And he was the one who initially tweeted out the thing about Kawhi has formally ruled out the Clippers. And just the greatest screenshot from this point in time was Ari Abraham quote retweeting that, saying, "Can confirm." Like there was like a totally separate like set of media that we were following at the time that were like children or people that we don't actually know who they are.
Hold on. You don't believe RD Ambition and Ari Abraham? Literally the Woj and Shams of Reddit and Twitter? Like
they were the future at that time.
They were young prospects, young journalistic prospects.
But those guys, like, ultimately, you can't get mad at them. You know, they're having fun. They're young.
They're
They're
doing
just
it for
out there
clout.
making a
Yeah,
name for them.
true.
However, Chris Broussard,
Love him.
he went so hard for Kawhi going to the Lakers. And this was his funniest tweet that he had. He said, Kawhi update. Raptors had strong meeting yesterday. Drake heavily involved. Talked of having Kawhi involved with his record label. Kawhi in deep soul searching. Wants Lakers, but wants to make sure Big Three will fit and work. Clippers out. It's between Lakers and Raptors. Very close. That was the whole tweet.
First off, that read exactly like a Donald Trump quote.
Yeah, it did actually. As I was reading it, sounds like Trump.
Clippers out. So first off, Chris Broussard reporting that so they didn't know if the Anthony Davis, LeBron James, and Kawhi Leonard Big Three would have worked.
He had to do some deep soul searching to think about that. He didn't know if it would completely wreck the NBA or not.
And now we know that Kawhi actually does has a music career and like does like
That's
produce
true.
stuff and like make mixtapes and stuff. So
that was actually a good call by Chris.
There you go. Yeah, Chris knew that Drake was courting him to be a part of OVO. Him and Nav, Kawhi maybe and Nav.
He also tweeted that he said Kawhi is quote Lakers to lose. He tweeted that at one point. He said, I've heard Kawhi is Laker bound. Person close to him told me today that no decision has been made, but we wait. And then on the flip side of that, you had Jalen Rose, who on TV said that he had heard from a source he was 99% sure that Kawhi was going back to Toronto. So around this time, Chris Broussard and Jalen Rose are getting like pit head to head against each other.
Sure.
Both of them completely wrong on the details, but they're also so confident in what is going to happen.
It's great. I love that when this is what I miss about the 2019 offseason, which was that like our brains were like stuff happens now and we're like, oh, like everyone gets excited, but like our brains were genuinely scrambled for like 2 weeks with all of this. It was like I was waking up every day and like checking my phone literally before I did anything else. Was like I can't sleep until I know where Kawhi goes. Like I was pissed when I woke up and I was like, I fell asleep an hour before he got traded. What the hell?
And Kawhi was like the perfect character for this entire experience because you don't know anything. You don't know what to trust. In fact, so Chris Haynes is the one who actually broke the story that he was signing with the Clippers. The second person to tweet, though, like simultaneously, was not Woj. It was Chris Carter, the Hall of Fame wide receiver, who apparently at this time had become like a Kawhi whisperer. And his tweet about Kawhi was like simultaneous with Chris Haynes tweeting about it.
Like, why is Chris Carter like well, he was on Fox Sports at the time, right? Yeah. So like, yeah, maybe he had a relationship. It's just a weird thing. Like, of course, Kawhi is being this mysterious guy. No one has any idea what he's going to do. Most of the time, these guys just like phone it in either with something on social media or they tell a bunch of people. Kawhi doesn't tell a soul. He left everyone in the dark until the last possible second. And also the big missing part of all of this is that a lot of people think that he did this because he wanted the Lakers to basically lose out on any other free agent that they could possibly get, which I don't know if he thought that deep into it, but like the Lakers had the max cap space and then they ended up with like Danny Green and I can't even remember. Maybe they just brought back like KCP or whatever. But it was funny that like there could have been that wrinkle to it too, where it's like, I'm actually such a evil genius that I'm going to screw over the Lakers in the meantime, make them think they have a chance. And then last second I'll pull it out. And then funny enough, the Lakers get Danny Green and then they win the title next year anyway. So, all right. So what came of this? Obviously the Clippers make it to their first Western Conference Finals, kind of without Kawhi because he gets hurt during the Jazz series. Paul George and Terrence Mann carried them to the Western Conference Finals, but obviously a large part of that is due to the fact that they traded for Paul George as part of the Kawhi thing, and Kawhi was amazing in the first round before he got hurt as well. Doc Rivers gets fired after the bubble. Very funny fallout that happened there. They end up getting Ty Lue, who's like one of the best coaches in the NBA. Obviously, they make the Western Conference Finals, and this is what jump-started, which leads to the next move, the OKC rebuild. So you guys get Shea, You get Gallo. Gallo walks in a year. You don't really care all that much about that. Shea was the real reason that Gallo made the money work, although Gallo was very good for you guys in that year. Shea is obviously the prize of this trade. And then there are a bunch of other firsts. Now, maybe I'm wrong here. I didn't look into it, but Jalen Williams was he the first one from this trade that was selected? Yeah. Okay. So Jalen Williams from Santa Clara in the first round. Jalen Williams with and he's with an E, who I liked a lot in the draft. So now you have SGA, Jalen Williams, and then still 3 future firsts left from this trade, correct?
Yeah, and like next year is a swap.
Okay,
but we also got like a Miami pick in there.
Yeah,
but yeah, the highlights obviously were the Clippers picks, which that number 12 that we got this year very well may be the best pick you get.
You got Trey Mann too, right? Wasn't that also from So you got Trey Mann, and the reason I know this is because the Sixers had the Miami pick, and we all were like, "That's going to be a really good pick. That's the double draft."
Oh my god!
Yeah, it was the double draft, and we were all like, "Miami's going to suck," and then we traded them Jimmy Butler. Which made them not bad, and then it ended up being the 19th pick, and you guys got Trey Mann, who I really liked in that draft a lot too.
I'm glad you brought up the double draft, because listening to Bill Simmons, that was brought up multiple times, but they were talking about this year, 2022, which can you imagine this draft class plus like Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson, and everyone from next year?
Yeah. That would have been That would have been amazing. I still want the double draft. I think eventually we'll get it, but we'll see. I mean, with all the money shit, like you never fucking know. But dude, yeah, the double draft thing was I remember because we found out that it wasn't going to happen in 2021, and we were like, okay, I guess we can trade the Heat pick now because it's not going to be as valuable. And also, the Heat are just always good. So, like, we were like, the best it's going to be is, like, the end of the lottery. And then it ended up being the 19th pick, I think, is where Trey Mann went. And actually, people thought that was a reach at the time, but I really liked him as a prospect. Okay, so that led us to the last move that we're going to talk about here, which is a move that you tweeting about this was what gave me the idea for this podcast. Because Chris Paul for Russell Westbrook happens. What was your immediate reaction as an OKC fan? Obviously, you have a lot of emotional attachment to Russ. You have, by that point, not as much.
I mean,
as a fan of the team, I remember when he left the team, the video that they posted, I was like, I'm getting emotional. I'm not like a Thunder fan. Like, there was a lot built into it for sure.
To be clear, like the majority of Thunder fans, yes, absolutely.
Okay,
I've always said, like, I've never been the biggest Russ guy. Like in the original team, like James Harden was actually my guy because he was left-handed and I liked his beard. He's the only Thunder player I ever bought merch for was James Harden. Like I love James Harden. So I obviously respect Russ, like did a ton of things both for the city and for that team, like putting them on the map with KD. But by this point, like I was pretty exhausted of just like everything surrounding Russ, because this is like the height of I don't know if you know Barry Trammell. He's one of our like local sports reporters. This is when he was having the beef with him every single like post-game press conference and wouldn't answer any of his questions or was saying next question. And it always just like building up because they kept losing in the first round. Sure. And I was like, dude, like this, you have to do something different to endear yourself. Like it's everything was like building up. It was getting like very stressed. And so by this point I was exhausted. I was fine with the idea of trading Westbrook at that point, especially post PG. For me, I was still like I had such a belief in Westbrook as like a good player, which by the way, this sounds like crazy to me now, but I was listening to Bill Simmons. He ranked him 12th.
Yeah.
In 2019 when he was talking about this trade. And so when we traded him to Houston, my first thought was, oh my gosh, this is Harden trade redux. Like we're just getting Daryl Morey out of a huge jam once again.
Right.
And giving him like this new like runway to success. Because at that time, the Chris Paul contract was seen as so negative.
It was.
And the way he had played in the playoffs and really the second half of that season, like people were super down on him. And it was like, can you even trade Chris Paul for anything? And so my immediate reaction was, oh my gosh, we just bailed out Daryl Morey once again. And like he pulled one over on us again. And so I was furious that it was Houston. Like the original report from Woj that Westbrook would even be interested in a trade said Miami. That was the first name that was out there.
That's what I had here. I was the only other team I could find was Miami, which was I felt like they kept getting linked. Westbrook has been linked to Miami for a while, I feel like, and I don't remember. All I remember was Daryl Morey coming out and saying, we're not trading Chris Paul at the Ringer thing with Russillo and Phil Simmons. He's like, we're not trading Chris Paul. What are you talking about? We're never doing that. We love him. And in Morey's defense, I don't think he wanted to trade Chris Paul. From everything that Tim McMahon says, he always would talk about this during the Ben Simmons saga when Ben was sitting out. And he was like, Morey does not care about getting awkward. Like, he said to James Harden, like, we're not trading Chris Paul unless we can find a Chris Paul trade. Like, I like Chris Paul still. The numbers, the analytics still say Chris Paul, it makes our team better. Like, if you look at, and I brought this up on a recent podcast, if you look up when Clint Capella, Chris Paul, and James Harden were all healthy, their record across those 2 years was like insane. Like, I think they were like, dude, at one point they were like 50-5 or something. Like, they were incredible that first year. And then the second year, when they all were healthy, they couldn't really all get healthy at the same time. They were still very good. But at this point, obviously, I think that Morey even went to Chris Paul. I even think that this burned the bridge between them, because when you guys were trading Chris Paul a year later, the Sixers and Morey tried to make a push for him, and he didn't want to come to the Sixers. Probably due to the fact that he didn't have a great relationship with Doc or with Morey because of what had happened. So I think that he saw it as like a backstabbing. And from everything Tim McMahon says, which I think Tim McMahon's pretty plugged into the Rockets and both of the Texas teams, really, with the Rockets and the Mavericks. But he seemed to say, like, this was Tillman Fertitta saying what we all thought, which was like, this is a bad contract. We need to just get off this contract. No matter what it takes, just get it done. And I think Presti knew that and was like, you're desperate to get off this contract, so we're going to get all these picks with it for Russell Westbrook, who at the time was still thought to be, at the time it was like Westbrook was the better player, but at least you got back these picks with Chris Paul. Like, it wasn't like there was this consensus that like Chris Paul was way better than Russell Westbrook. It was like, no, what Russell Westbrook is still really good. And like, honestly was pretty good for Houston that 1 year until he got hurt.
Yeah. I mean, that was like, that's what hurt me the most, is because like those last couple of years in OKC, we were just begging for more shooting. Like, how are we continuing to play Steven Adams in a lineup with Russell Westbrook? Like, we need, if this is ever going to work, you have to surround Russ with 4 shooters. And so then that following year, they trade Capella, surround Russ with 4 shooters, and all of a sudden, like, he's looking the best. He has like the best efficiency he's ever had in his career. Yeah. Like, everything is clicking, and I'm over there sitting like, this is it. Like, we did it. Like, we gave them a championship. Like, I was freaking out so much. And then of course he gets hurt. They beat OKC in the first round, but then lose to the Lakers. But even after that trade,
by the way, a 7-game series that no one expected to go 7.
Yes.
We all, like, everyone thought the Rockets would win that in like 5 or 6.
Yeah, which featured a Dort. It could have been a series-winning 3. It would have been beautiful. But yeah, you mentioned Tillman Fertitta. So McMahon, I mean, this is the great quote that Tillman Fertitta thought Chris Paul's contract was the worst he'd ever seen in business or sports. In business, the worst business contract he'd ever seen. Now, Trill, I looked up some bad business contracts. I just want to give you a few examples of what Chris Paul's deal was worse than. So Quaker Oats, okay, they buy Snapple for $1.7 billion. Okay, due to corporate culture not aligning, it was overtaken in the market by new Coca-Cola and Pepsi products, leading them to sell Snapple just 3 years later for $300 million. $1.7 billion to $300 million. That not as bad as the Chris Paul contract. Okay, Daimler purchased Chrysler for $40 billion in 1998. In 2007, they sold it for a measly $6 billion. That also not worse than Chris Paul. Like, that's how bad this deal was. So I actually feel, I don't know, I was harsh on this deal initially, but looking back, like, a lot of people really did think that Chris Paul contract was unsalvageable, like that you would have to give up assets in order to get off of him. And that was kind of
there was only like 2 years left. Like, it wasn't like it was like a 5-year. Like,
so
wasn't there
it was
2 years?
It was 3 years, 124. But the last year was a player option, and at that time, everyone assumed he was going to pick it up.
Of course.
He actually ended up not picking it up because with the Suns and got like an extension there.
390 or something. Yeah.
But like, so Brian Windhorst reported in the weeks after that trade that his preference was to get traded to the Heat, but the Heat wanted their 21 and 23 first round picks back from OKC in any deal for Chris Paul. So it was definitely seen as like a negative asset at that point, which obviously, I mean, it was just traded with 2 picks and 2 swaps for Russell Westbrook. So.
You know, like he turns his career around. He turns his career around and obviously recoups his own value. I mean, he gets traded a year later. It wasn't a crazy haul, right? But like considering what we had thought Chris Paul was at the time versus what the Rockets got back for Russell Westbrook, like they got Kelly Oubre, who they then traded to Golden State, but I believe that was also so Golden State loves to just trade fake first, right? That's their thing. I guess they trade a heavily protected first that doesn't convey
It was crushing, yes.
And they also got Ricky Rubio. Yeah, and then they also got Ricky Rubio, who they flipped for Poku in order to OKC had the pick that became Jaden McDaniels, I believe, and then they got they sent
an extra pick and they flipped those two,
yeah. And then they also got Ty Jerome and something else for that, whatever. And then
so importantly, they got the Phoenix pick, which this was this last year's draft, pick number 30, which OKC traded to Denver, took back JaMychal Green, and got that 27 Denver. So that's like ends up being the best asset out of all of this.
Right. Which is such a disaster for the Nuggets too. Like, why did you just salary dump JaMychal Green for a future first for literally the last pick in the first round in a not great draft?
Yeah, not my business.
I don't know. It turned out great for you guys, so who cares? But yeah, so obviously, let's just talk about how this kind of ended up for both teams involved. The Rockets last only 1 year with Russ and Harden. Morey quits. Russ gets traded for John Wall and a pick that OKC ends up getting back because and then they flip it this year, as we talked earlier, from Washington for the Wizards. And OKC continues their massive haul of picks, like you said. They then flipped another first that they got for Chris Paul for an extra future first. So they still have a ton of first-round picks, and a massive rebuild will continue over the next few years. So a crazy, crazy offseason that I miss dearly, and I hope that we can have an offseason like this sometime soon, personally.
It is probably the best. After going through it all and all the details, I really do believe it was the best.
Crazy.
It cannot be topped.
Yeah. It was seriously the peak of slop. And we need another offseason, or like the trade deadline. This past trade deadline was the funnest trade deadline, in my opinion. The amount of guys that were getting moved, whatever. I just need a slop fest that rivals this. So Kevin Durant and Donovan Mitchell, let's get these trades going so that I can have some slop again in my life, so I don't have to relive the offseason from 3 years ago. Talk about it. But Alex, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Go subscribe to the Saturday Slam and Jam, which I have been on before, is one of my favorite national NBA podcasts, and Down to Dunk, which I actually followed through the draft because I missed the process era and the draft stuff so much that I watched all of your guys' draft stuff and enjoyed it a lot.
Sweet. Thanks for having me on.
Anytime, dude. Peace.